Did it really?
So that I couldn't get to his memorial service in New York. But fortunately we had one out here. But that's all the subject. That was...
Right, of course. So you were talking about how when Cesar left, that both the burden but also the support of the CSO, that you all were a very important support network for him.
Yep.
At campus ministry, at the
migrant ministry.
Migrant ministry, right?
And of course, at the time, we had no clue what that was going to mean. We were just learning and watching and hoping, all skeptical. I mean, one guy with no money, I mean, like, how was he going to take on the largest, most powerful industry in the state?
What enabled him to do that? Was faith a part of that for him? What do you think enabled him to do something that everyone said was impossible? And how was that shaped for him?
Cesar came from a very strong, traditional Catholic background. So faith was important to him. Going to Mass was important to him. Confession was important to him. Mass was important to him. So, and then his mother instilled nonviolence in him, just in the kids. This is not how you solve problems, like the simple things that happen between kids, right? This is not how you solve problems. You talk these things out. You don't beat on each other, and you don't fight in the schoolyard, and this. So anyway, and then of course he did his own reading, and he became. But faith was kind of like a given for Cesar. It was just part of his life. He didn't make a big deal about it. He didn't talk about it. He didn't preach about it. But it was just part of his life.
It was just his daily bread.
It was his daily bread. And
but in some way, did it feed into this decision to do something impossible? Did he talk about the decision to do something impossible?
That and anger.
The combination of faith and anger.
Anger over what he had seen happen to his own parents in the fields. See, he grew up in a farm in Yuma, but during the 30s they lost that farm, and then they became migrant farm workers and throughout California. And so Cesar just saw how they treated his dad and his mom, and he saw what it meant for them as kids, to be the children of migrant farm workers. And he experienced a lot of discrimination, having to go to the balcony to see movies in Delano. And so there was a lot of pent-up anger and outrage and determination to right these wrongs. He had a core commitment to righting these wrongs, and his faith just kind of like strengthened that, or undergirded it.
Undergirded it.
Yeah.
One word that's come up a lot, a word that particularly in the civil rights movement people have used over and over again, is grounding. That the faith was like grounding. They were grounded in it.
And like the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
It met the farm workers in their traditional Catholic faith. So there was like this confluence of the leadership's faith and commitment and the given of the farm workers' faith and commitment, which you often see in organizing campaigns now. Workers just simply embracing religious services at times of struggle, with organizers kind of like not knowing for sure what to do with this, right? I mean, well-educated, secularized, young people, wonderful. I'd love them all, but just sort of like they not knowing what to do with this religious component, but also seeing the workers, how meaningful it is to them, how strengthening it is to them, how inspiring it is to them. Well, Fredo Benitez became an angel in their eyes that week in July. So there was this.
So Cesar, and I was very struck by what you said also about his commitment to right wrongs, that was the frame in which he thought about this. And, you know, Vincent Harding talked about the hunger for justice. What Jesus talked about, the hunger for justice, what it is to stand rooted in that hunger for justice. And it sounds like that's what you're describing, this kind of absolute hunger for justice. Because you can be angry and do lots of things with the anger, but his anger was like a laser. It was focused on the hunger for justice.
Exactly. That's where his experience, particularly in terms of what happened to his own family, led to this laser-like commitment, and lifetime commitment, which, you know, I kept saying to people, when Cesar and Helen and their 8 kids went to Delano with like $800 in savings, fortunately they had relatives in Delano. That's one reason they went there. Everybody thinks it was there because they went there because of the Delano, the grapes, but they went there really because that was a place they could be. And he traveled all over the state.
Yeah, Dolores told me once that grapes was not the original focus anyhow. He wanted potatoes to be the focus.
I don't remember that.
She said she had a fight with him on the phone. He told her that he wanted to do a boycott of potatoes, and she said, "No, you can't do that. You have to do grapes." Who knows? Who knows? But we all have these apocryphal memories.
Exactly. And grapes happened by accident. I mean, it wasn't really. Yeah. It wasn't really the focus of at that time, the National Farm Workers Association. It happens because the Filipinos, you know, went out on strike, and then the Latino, the Mexican workers supported the Filipinos.
And yes, you were back to the beginning. You were talking about the $800. They went with $800 to Delano. They went because they had family relationships there.
Right.
And you were, at this moment, you all were a support network for him without really believing in what he was trying to do, but caring about him. And you said you were just learning, which I think is a very faithful stance, to be waiting and watching and learning.
And increasingly committed to what he was doing. Somewhat skeptical, you know. Being educated people, we knew that even the Democrats were in the pockets of the growers. But skeptical, but hopeful, and really, really committed to what he was doing. So I often say then, the grape strike happened by accident as far as the National Farm Workers Association, as far as Cesar is concerned. The Filipinos got a wage increase in Coachella, and when they came to Delano, they asked for the same wage increase, and they didn't get it, so they went on strike. And then the Mexican farm workers voted a commitment to nonviolence and just to go out on strike in support of the Filipinos. And that's how the great Delano grape strike began in September of 1965.
So were the Filipinos organized in a union?
Yes.
But the Mexicans were not part of it.
AFL-CIO had an organizing affiliate called the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. But it was run by some redneck auto worker from back east who didn't speak Spanish and, you know, was kind of clueless about the culture, and a wonderful guy. We all loved and hoped for AWOC would be able to do something, but as soon as the two groups came together in the Delano grape strike, you kind of knew who was going to emerge as the leader in this workers' movement. Because Cesar had a kind of a unique vision. What I was about to say was, when they went to Delano in 1962, they went with this decision that this is what they were going to do for the rest of their lives until it produced some results. In other words, this is going to be our life. We're not going to try this out. We're not going to see if we can get the growers to understand our needs. We're just going to do this, and we'll try this, and we'll try that, and we'll try whatever, but we're just going to keep doing it. And I used to say to supporters, I mean, not too many of us ever in our lives, except maybe in marriage, make a commitment like that, and then live with it. And that had an impact on us too. And there was a level of faith in this. They didn't have money. It was just like, well, you know, it's biblical, really.
It is biblical.
Right.
That's
We'll
complete stepping out on faith.
Jesus would have us do, and somehow God will take care of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened. I mean, just people were attracted to the...
It has a moral authority.
Absolutely.
When people take that kind of risk.
So, when he came to us in 1965, the strike's underway, right? And like he came to us like the next day and said, will you visibly support the grave strike? And I said, well, what do you have in mind, Cesar? And he said, well, can you send some staff here? Can you raise some money for gas for people going out of the picket line? Can you organize food drives? And maybe more importantly, can you bring church people here to see what's going on? So I molded over a little bit, but I often say if I had said, you know, Cesar, I don't think this will be good for the budget of the California Migrant Ministry. I think my staff would have done it anyway, because that's how we were all sort of like engaged in what he was doing and hopeful about what he was doing. So we decided to do those simple things. And then the churches all blew up. And it's easy when you think about it. I didn't expect it. I mean, I had no idea what was coming, but it's logical. If someone had sat down with me and said, Chris, what do you think the Methodist Church in Porterville is going to do? What do you think the Presbyterian Church in Brawley is going to do? What do you think the Lutheran Church in Turlock is going to do? I mean, like, these people are going to go berserk.
Because they were growers, or they were dependent on the growers,
or their
the
buildings
economy.
were built by the growers.
Yeah.
Or they sold their machinery to growers, or in some way they depended on the growers. So economically they were tied, and with very few examples, and there were some examples, thank God for that. The ministers sort of like went along with their congregations who basically wanted the migrant ministry wiped off the face of the earth, because they discovered that their local church was supporting the Northern California Council of Churches, and the Northern California Churches was part of the support system for the California Migrant Ministry, so that their local money was coming to these maniacs who were supporting Cesar Chavez, the communist. How can the church be there doing this and being against us? We're the most loyal of the church people in this whole valley. My grandfather built this building. So for them, it was just like, it's an totally understandable shock and outrage, which led to action, and the action meant getting rid of these people. Fortunately, not with guns.
Well, thank God. At least that's the one advantage of church people. How, two things. One is that people have been involved in the migrant ministry through these congregations for some time, right? There have been volunteers who have been seeing the suffering. Probably a lot of them women.
Exactly. In these local, rural, most of our relationships for doing the work were with local congregations. And many, many women.
So there actually must have been a fight in a lot of bedrooms. Not just, it wouldn't have been wholesale the churches against you, because some of those women would be very empathetic, made sense. And so, but the men had the power at that time in history over the churches. So there would have been this interesting conflagration. It wasn't just the churches wholesale against you. It would have been, like I said, probably fights in a lot of bedrooms.
Exactly. And there were those people in those churches who had gotten to know us and believed that what we were doing was something we believed in, and then they believed in too. But from the point of view of our relationships, we lost them all.
The formal relationships.
The formal relationships with all the churches. Not with all the ministers, but with all the churches.
All the denominations or the congregations?
Oh no, just the congregations.
All the congregations.
And just the rural congregations.
Yeah. Do you remember sort of examples of people who did stand up and stay with you? And what you can...
There's this, just to give you a flavor of what it was like at that time. Winthrop Yinger, a UCC minister, wonderful guy, was recently called to be the pastor of the Arvin Congregational Church. And after the strike was underway, in the pulpit, he prayed for the well-being he prayed for the growers and the workers who were involved in this strike in Delano, California. And they had an emergency trustees meeting right after the church service and told him, you cannot pray for those workers in our church. These are communists. They are trying to overturn our country, and you cannot pray for them. So to his credit, he resigned that same week. He left and became the director of the Fresno area migrant ministry and a strong supporter. Wrote a book about Cesar. But that was kind of like the way it was. Now there were Bill Dew was a Methodist minister in Cutler or someplace right near in Fresno County or Tulare County. And he was just one of those, he became a bishop. One of those rare, really good bishops. He was one of those people who could disagree with his congregation and still hold them with him. So he stood up and he joined a small group of pastors in the San Joaquin Valley who supported the migrant ministry and survived. Chose when to leave, wasn't thrown out. But he was a rare example.
His people felt connected to him and loved by him.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
They had come to really care about him and his family, and they disagreed with him.
How did he describe his commitment? What were the kinds of frames and phrases he used to describe it, or scriptures, or how did he name what he was doing?
I can't answer
You don't
that
remember.
accurately. Yeah, but as I say,
But he was able to do that.
he was able to do that. But he's one of only like two or
Did he bring
three.
some of them along? Did his congregation stay involved also?
I think, yeah, he definitely moderated the
conflict.
the virulence of his growers.
Yeah.
Many of whom were not big corporate, monsters, but smaller farmers struggling themselves. But I mean, I always told our friends, what about the poor small farmers? I said, yeah, right, but all those poor small farmers have really, really nice homes. They send their kids to college. It's just a different thing than the way the farm workers live their lives. They live in shacks. Their kids are lucky to get through grade school. I mean, okay, I agree. I love the small farmers, but let's not compare their plight with the workers' plight. But that was our biggest, well, what happened was that because every local congregation took a formal position asking their denomination to withdraw any support for the migrant ministry, every denomination went through a two-year battle not over whether farm workers deserve justice, but whether this migrant ministry that was with the farm workers should survive. And except for the San Joaquin Diocese of the Episcopal Church, we won all those because the urban churches outnumbered the rural
churches.
And the urban membership outnumbered the rural membership. But in the San Joaquin Diocese, it's all rural churches. It's the diocese that just left the Episcopal Church because...
Well, I was a pastor in Fresno and in Sanger. So I know a lot about this. I was a pastor from 97 through 2000. Only 3 years.
Oh, you missed the best fun.
But I'm actually, what's very interesting, just on a very personal note, is one of the things that I've understood working with the civil rights movement folks that we've been interviewing is how much of that heritage actually still forms what goes on in the South, and how important it is if you were going to be in the South to really understand that. And how many Latinos I know who live in Georgia who actually don't understand. I mean, I'm understanding so much more. But listening to you, I'm getting things that happen in my ministry in Sanger that I never understood. I mean, I was called partly to bring in new families into a dying church. But when I would bring in Latino families,
Ho, ho, ho.
yes. I actually had an experience one day of 3 families coming to church, new, 1 white and 2 Latino, and everybody said, "Did you meet the new family?" The new family. There were 3 families. The new family. The only new family that counted was white.
Oh, Lord God.
But I understand that particular sort of terror. We were going to bring a child care center in that was run by a Chicano couple in town. And the opposition to bringing the child care center into the church was something I only understand listening to you. I'm sure that was one of the churches. I just never knew. Bethlehem Lutheran in Sanger.
It's like bringing homeless people into our suburban churches.
Yes, that's how it felt. But
What about our children? Our children will be in childcare all day long. What will these people do to them? But anyway.
Yeah. So no, but I'm understanding this, and you know, part of what I'm fascinated by is there were these fights going on in all the denominations. You know, extended 2-year, you said fights is. Well, the interesting thing about that is where else in society do people have a moral dialogue about issues like this? That normally all there is, you know, if you weren't in those churches, it was just a class struggle, pure and simple on some level. But if you were in those churches, there was actually a moral dialogue going on that all those people had to sit through in one way or another. Did you see any impact of that? Were there conversions? Were there people over the 2 years who shifted and were able to stand with you that wouldn't have at the beginning?
Yes, there were some. But what mostly happened
Yes.
is that people in the urban churches discovered us. And discovered, of course, now it was becoming more visible in the media. So people were discovering there was this farm workers movement, and 1966 was the March to Sacramento, and the arguments inside the church just kind of like educated people, informed them. What was this about? Why was the church there? And what was the history of the church being there? And by the way, the best antidote for people who are really upset with us or confused by what was going on was just tell them how we got involved, the history of the migrant ministry, and what we did over the years, and how we got involved in this, and how we could see that organizing themselves was the only way into the future for farm workers. And people were just kind of like, oh, it's not just these young radical ministers showing up at Delano to have a good time. I mean, this really happened because of the ministry of the church. And so it made a huge difference. And people, as I say, what happened administratively was that we lost all these rural churches, but we gained all these urban supporters, and eventually national support too. So
there's actually many pieces that are coming together for me listening to the story in ways that I never expected.
yeah.
Like some of the urban-rural stuff that goes on in the Lutheran synods. And now I understand the background.
But I learned a lesson, not quick enough, but I learned a lesson. I used to be invited to speak in rural churches. Before the strike, there would have been like 8 people come to learn about the migrant ministry. The church was overflowing. There were people in the parking lot, right? Come to lynch this guy. And so I used to kind of like moderate my presentation because I knew this was overwhelmingly a hostile audience. But after a while I realized I need to talk to the few who are our friends. I mean, they're fighting this lonely battle here in this area, in this context. And they need as much ammunition as they can get to deal with their husbands, their wives, their co-workers, their church members, maybe even their ministers. They need reinforcement. So then I began to just change the way I talked in those. And it was easier, of course.
Right,
Because
you weren't there to fight. You were there to speak to the people whose hearts were with you and to give them the
and to tell them
resources that they
tell them
needed to stay
exactly
strong.
why we were there and
Right.
exactly what was going on. And
Which I'm sure in the end was the
Right.
most effective way to change hearts and minds of the others anyhow. You know, to
Exactly.
come from that place.
The
Desmond
others-
Tutu taught me that, to come from the place of knowing.
the
Not
others
the
were
place of
unfortunately
knowing.
just locked into the economic realities of their communities.
I had, when we were
They
doing
couldn't
this,
hear.
when I was talking about in a conservative congregation around immigration, I had somebody say to me, if I listen to this woman said, if I listen to this as an American, I'm against everything you say. If I listen to this as a Christian, I have to agree with you. So she said, so I just have to stop thinking about this and be a Christian. It was the most amazing comment.
Whoa.
It was the most amazing comment. It was really interesting for me. And I can just imagine that as you're talking, that was on some level what you were dealing with. I actually believe that as an American we should support immigration reform, but I understand how somebody with those particular set of frames and ideas thinks that it's not a good thing. Same thing, their economic realities that they say, that's not a good thing. They have to move beyond that. If I was going to put a banner over what we're struggling with in creating a faith-rooted model, is understanding the interaction between solidarity and self-interest.
Solidarity and
Self-interest. That there has to be this really vital interaction of communion between people operating out of self-interest and people operating out of solidarity. And to take really seriously what does real, authentic solidarity look like.
And what is real, authentic self-interest?
Interest look like, that's right. So there's some, in the civil rights movement, when we were talking about Black Power, when that came along and what happened, and then the breakdown of solidarity and the superficial, and some of how superficial some of the solidarity was in the first, and then, so I think as we work towards this new model, that's what we need to pay real attention to, is that solidarity is not less important than self-interest, and self-interest is probably not less important than solidarity, but both of them can be in service of the reign of God, and the question is how and when. So that as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about the people who were over against their economic interest in profound solidarity, and then the people who were standing in for their interests, but in a way that was in solidarity. And then I'm sure, so that's sort of the thing that's what I'm working with, listening to you. So, always getting down to what makes authentic solidarity possible, what makes it happen, what fuels it, what equips it, because you had a lot of that, it sounds like. You had people who were witnesses of solidarity.
Yeah. And for almost all of them, it was because they knew workers and their families.
It was intimate solidarity. It was a bond of love.
Somewhere along the way, they discovered that these folks were humans like them. And they couldn't erase that. They wanted to, but they couldn't erase it. And so when you talked about what would be good for these folks and do they really want Thanksgiving turkeys from us? Wouldn't it be better if they could buy their own Thanksgiving turkeys? People couldn't just, throw that away. It meant something to them because they'd known these people. And then if they had known them a little more, if they'd taken that step into into the battle, they would have seen